Very good afternoon and a warm welcome to each and everyone. Today we have the golden opportunity to have an interaction with legendary Nobel laureates. With great pleasure, I invite on stage Ms. Annika Hughes-Falk, Head of Educational Program, Nobel Center. Annika, warm welcome and request you to kindly take over the session.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here together with all of you teachers. I'm Head of Education at the Nobel Center in Stockholm, and we're here together with the Nobel laureates to meet all of you with an exhibition that you might have been to already, and this meeting. Tomorrow I'm going to meet some students as well. So the Nobel Prize is all about asking questions and exploring new things and doing good for humanity. So therefore we want to inspire you, the teachers, because you are so important. So I'm very glad that you are here today. So the Nobel Prize was founded by Alfred Nobel, who was a Swedish scientist and inventor, and he really believed that science, literature and peace would change the world into being a better place. And we think that you, the teachers, really can contribute in a very important way to make the world better. And he had no kids, so he donated the money to this Nobel Prize. And we have 6 categories of the Nobel Prize, and all the laureates, we have so many Nobel laureates that can inspire us all to make the world better. So here today we're going to talk about how teachers really impact lives. And of course education for everyone, and making education accessible for all, and really making the teaching profession it's so important, and this all of us know. And I've been working as a teacher for many years, and then I was a principal also for many years back in Stockholm. And a couple of days ago I visited a school here in Goa and met some fantastic teachers that you all also will meet here today. And we were talking about the differences between Sweden and India, and also so many similarities, because I think we share the same challenges and the same possibilities, if we can take that possibility and make something great out of it. So you're so important for the students and for the future, and that's why we are here today. So we are doing something that we call the Nobel Education Network. And this is new. We haven't done it before, and it's not ready yet. We're building it together with you. So that's also why I'm curious. What kind of resources would you need from us? What can we do for you? And we want to link together teachers with each other from different countries, and also with scientists and researchers, and to do everything to improve the schools. So I'm going to ask you some questions about this later in the program, and I hope you will interact with us here today. So we will send out people in the audience and let you ask questions. And please, let it be questions and not statements. So questions to the Nobel laureates. Okay, so I think it's time to welcome up on stage our Nobel laureates. So give a warm hand to all of them. And moderating this discussion will be Gustav Kjellstrand from the Nobel Center. So, welcome up on stage. You will be here with me, please. So, we have here Christiane Nüsslein-Volhard and Professor Serge Haroche and Professor Richard Roberts. So give them a warm hand.
It's on. Can stand over here. So, welcome. Well, welcome again to you, all the teachers. It's fantastic to have you here. And welcome, of course, to the Nobel laureates. You are all here because you are interested in teaching and think that teachers are important in different ways. And we'll talk much more about that. But I would just like first to ask you a little bit about, because you're also here because you have received the Nobel Prize. So Professor Nüsslein-Volhard, you received the prize for finding genes that control how embryos develop using a fruit fly. Can you say very briefly, what does that have for implications for medicine or science in general?
I was interested in the question how, from a very uniform, in an egg cell, very short period of time, and this governed by often other genes in a complicated form at the proper places. These genes are control genes comprising a very small number of the entire genome, and they turned out to be very important in other processes of life, for example in growth, in development, and it also turned out that they were not just specific for the fly, but they had homologs or counterparts in other organisms, such as also humans and mice and frogs. And many of these genes also play a role in cancer and in several diseases. And in this way, our basic research, which was focused initially only on understanding how the fly developed, had an impact on medicine, which we did not foresee. And this was also not the reason why we did this research, but just for pure curiosity to understand a very important, complex process.
Interesting way to, of course, approach science with curiosity. And probably, Professor Haroche, you received the prize for capturing a photon. And why do you capture a photon?
Okay, more generally, the topic is how you can manipulate single quantum particles. For instance, a piece of matter is made of a huge number of atoms, and usually you don't see the particles individually. A light beam is made of a huge number of light particles called. Is it which obeys to build a kind of a lot of things which were already theoretically known, the concept of quantum physics, but which had never been observed directly. For instance, usually when you collect light with your eye, the act of seeing is an act which destroys the photons. The photons fall on your retina and are destroyed. We were able to find a way in which you detect a photon without destroying it. That is, you see the photon, and it is there after you have seen it, and another atom can come and confirm that the photon was there. And by doing that, again, it's basic science, but this teaches us how to use these simple processes, maybe to invent new devices which would use this strange logic to store information or to communicate information from one place to another, or to compute, to use this information in a system called quantum bits, and by coupling these quantum bits together to get new ways of computing. This is a big dream of the quantum computer. So again, this is research which is basic, which was started out of curiosity and out of a kind of challenge. We thought that the atoms are there, the photons are there, why are we not able to address them individually? So it's a challenge which will turn maybe in applications, but we did not start with the idea to have applications.
No, I mean, that's really fantastic. I guess these kinds of experiments were thought to be impossible, and more or less.
In fact, the founding fathers of quantum physics tried to imagine these kind of situations, but they thought this would be a kind of thought experiments forever. And Erwin Schrödinger was one of the fathers of quantum physics, said in a famous paper in 1952, we always imagine that we are juggling with single electrons, single atoms, and single photons, but of course this will never be possible, and if we are able to do that, it will lead to ridiculous consequences. So we hope to prove that the consequences will not be ridiculous in the future.
So one ridiculous consequence was your Nobel Prize.
Yeah, that was it.
But this must have been a good feeling to prove Schrödinger wrong. I mean, that's...
he was not wrong in the ideas, but he could not imagine, and this is again a testimony to the fact that science is progressing in such a fantastic way that even the brightest minds which originated in these ideas were not able to imagine all the consequences of these ideas.
Yeah, and Professor Roberts, you of course worked on split genes, which was, I guess, also no one had imagined before you did your experiments. What is a split gene?
Well, basically, the discovery for which I won the Nobel Prize was that the genes that you have inside you and that all higher organisms have inside them are split up into pieces and are arranged in a different way to the genes in bacteria. In bacteria, a gene is simply a long linear piece of DNA. You make a copy of that directly into RNA, and then you translate it on a ribosome into protein. In higher organisms, we discovered that that was not the case. What happens is the gene is very much larger than it is in a bacterium. You make a copy of the gene as RNA, but then that RNA has to be cut and spliced before you get down to the sense part of it that you would have gotten if you'd made the RNA in a bacterium. I think a good analogy is in a movie. When a movie is being made, a number of scenes are shot, and then the editor comes along and cuts and splices to make a whole scene as though it was all shot at once. And this is exactly what happens inside every cell in your body, that the gene is first copied to this RNA and then it's cut and spliced just like a movie tape before it makes sense. And this was something that nobody had postulated before, so it's always nice when no one has actually already said, oh yes, it must be that way. And so it came as a big surprise, but we were very lucky that when we did the experiment that really proved everything, it was an electron microscopy experiment, and you had immediate visualization of what was going on, and biologists, and I guess people, are very visual, and so as soon as you see it, you believe it. And so the day we did the experiment, everybody was convinced, and it turned out that this was a general phenomenon throughout eukaryotes.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is quite clear is that you are obviously all three good educators yourself to explain your science briefly but really clearly. Annika?
Yeah, so now we'll move on to the next thing. So I will give a warm hand to Professor Haroche and Professor Roberts, and you will stay on stage, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so now Gustav is doing a little interview with Professor Nüsslein-Volhard. So I'll leave you to it, Gustav.
So it's on too. So, yes, it's really nice to have you here. And now we won't talk so much about embryos, but more about teaching and school. In your biographical essay on the Nobel Prize website, you had actually quoted a report card from your school where your teacher said that you were lazy.
Sure.
Is that true?
Yes, of course.
Were you lazy in school?
I was lazy in the topics which were not interesting.
Okay.
So I did actually, I like to go to school, I like to learn, and I really appreciated all these incredible informations and challenges I received from my teachers. But some things I just got bored with, and others I liked very much. So I decided to focus on the things which I really liked very much and poked very deeply into them, much deeper than the teachers expected me to. And in others, I just decided to leave them aside. And at the end, my school grades were not terrific, actually.
Okay.
But they were okay.
Okay.
So I survived.
I guess it evens out if you're really good in some subjects and worse in some. Because I should state that the report card that you quoted actually went on to say that that you were a bit lazy sometimes, but also performed above average or beyond expectation.
Certainly.
So is this a trait of you? This curiosity is, you mentioned yesterday that curiosity is a driving force.
I think curiosity is a driving force, and your own, I think, some sort of enthusiasm and passion is absolutely required if you would like to come to exceptional performances. I think, the two extremes in school is the people who do everything the teacher says and they have all very good grades and at the end it's all even, but you do not see any personality in this person. And the other extreme is perhaps my case, where I chose to do certain things with great intensity and other things I didn't do with great intensity. So for the future, for being a scientist, originality and creativity is something very important. It's not just sufficient to perform well everywhere, but it is important to focus and to be exceptionally good at certain issues. And this is why the people who have only good grades are not necessarily the most promising students to be good scientists.
But your teachers in school, did they encourage this curiosity, or did they see this? Did they agree with your view right now that sometimes...
I think the teachers saw that, and the teachers who taught the topics I liked, for example, the biology teacher was very pleased with me. And I learned a lot from her, and she was really, in the last year at school, we had fantastic teaching from her, and we learned not all, but many important topics, which I really like very much, like genetics, and we learned about evolution, about Darwin, we learned physiology, how eyes function and things like that, and I appreciated it very much, such that when I went to university I was pretty disappointed because...
Why?
Well, the exciting things I knew already.
Okay.
And then you had to learn all these dull things, how many bones a shark's head has or something like that. And I didn't really like that very much, so I went on to other things. But at the end I came back to biology.
Yeah. So some teachers were encouraging, but were the other teachers, that made mistakes with you, that they didn't encourage you?
Oh no, but there were many, we had a very broad education, and if I had focused on everything, I would never have achieved something. You need some time for your passions, so this is why I neglected, what did I neglect? Physics and English literature.
Okay.
I love German literature, I love to learn poems, and I love music and arts, and I hated Latin. But nevertheless, I had a good school education.
But was it still good that you had all these different subjects, or would it have been better if you could have chosen earlier to focus on one that you were interested in?
No, I'm actually very grateful that we had a really broad education. I was, at that time, we had a slight focus on natural sciences versus languages, but not as much as it's done today. And we had a broader education than is now custom. And I really regret that at many curricula in the schools, biology, for example, is of a very minor importance. And I think this is a big mistake, because biology is so important for every life. Everybody should have some basic knowledge about the basic facts of life and of animals and of plants, because it's not only important for our daily life, but also for medicine, and it's also very important for agriculture. We have to know where our crops come from, where our food is made, and how this is generated. And if people don't have any clues to that, I think this can be very dangerous, also for our environment. And this, I think, is something all the teachers should know. Focus on biology.
I think maybe the ones who applauded when you said you didn't like physics are already teaching biology, but you're also a teacher, of course, yourself at the university.
Very much of teaching is self-teaching.
Okay.
And you choose your topics And at the time when I studied, there was no fixed curricula, so we choose our topics and try to do a sort of a patchwork of courses and lectures which helped us. But then at the end there is a final exam, and then you have to fulfill several exams, and then, well, then you sit down in the library and you learn. You just learn from textbooks, and you pick the things from textbooks. Nowadays, I think it's much easier to get knowledge, because you don't even have to go to libraries. You just go to your computer and you go to Wikipedia, or you have so much sources for information which we didn't have. It's much easier now, and I really enjoy that a lot. That you don't have to have a large library, or you don't have to know someone who tells you something, but you can find out many things on your own with your computer. Yeah.
But I guess that also means that even at the university level, that the role of being a teacher maybe changes. It's not only about conveying information, but also maybe an attitude towards science or towards knowledge.
Well, I think good lectures are probably quite helpful. And there are inspiring teachers. Unfortunately, when I did my diploma, when I was a diploma student, unfortunately my professors were not very good. So I learned most from talking with the other students. And they were very interesting students, so we had a club where we taught ourselves and we discussed the topics, and this was very helpful. And then later, when I went to do my undergraduate and graduate work, where I worked in the laboratory, of course, there were many people who were very knowledgeable, and we discussed a lot about modern science. And this is where you get your stimulation from.
Yeah. I heard this morning you were also talking, and you said that, I don't know if this will make us unpopular, but you said that maybe sometimes you shouldn't listen too much to your teachers.
This is with respect to advice. I mean, I told you that I chose my topics at school where I wanted to focus, and it's the same thing at the university. Well, you have to get some basic knowledge. There is no way out. I mean, you have to do your courses in mathematics and in physics and in chemistry and in biochemistry and in biology, zoology, botany. You need to know a certain background knowledge, and this is for school perhaps not that important, but for your studies this is really important. And it's important to give you, to enable you to choose what is this particular subject which would inspire, which you would like to perform. And this is what I mean with you have to choose that yourself. Of course you can ask people what you find interesting and so on, but at the end it's your life, it's your study. You have to choose what you do, and you cannot put the blame on anyone else. If you choose the wrong topic, and at the end it doesn't help to say, oh, teacher so-and-so told me to do that. It's your own responsibility, and you have to be, you have to feel that, and you have to, choose something which really, on the long run, makes you happy. And no one can tell you what this will be. Only you yourself.
Yeah. So, let me change a little bit, because I'm also thinking about when you yourself become a scientist and you do research, do you think that it's important for researchers, for scientists to also teach? Or should they spend their time on just doing research? Or is there a conflict between the two, or can they be complementary?
A classical university requires that the professors do both. They teach and they also do research. It's sort of difficult, and many professors prefer research, and they try to get out of their teaching duties. And I went very good. I had enough energy and time to just focus on my research, and which was very successful. But perhaps it would have been good had I done a little bit more teaching. I did do teaching in the sense that I had undergraduate students and graduate students who did projects in my laboratory, and I helped them perform. And I always regarded it as my duty, and my job is to help my collaborators to success. And this is, this is also a way of teaching, to providing them with and necessary infrastructure to perform their research, to have interesting seminars, to organize series where they report on their own experiments, and to organize discussions between the students, and to provide an atmosphere where there is collegiality and they can communicate with each other and help each other. And this is I think, very important. And I also, you know, I mean, also in a research institute, the directors have to have a lot of influence on what's going on there, and the lectures and the people you invite, and all the infrastructure, and the intellectual challenge is sort of, you can influence and organize.
Yeah. So do you try for these, if it's undergraduate or later in career, you try to sort of, is the most important thing to direct their work, or is it also important to convey your sort of enthusiasm about curiosity and about science? Is that attitude also important?
I think this certainly has been very important, and this is part of probably my scientific success, that I had very good collaborators. I had fantastic graduate students and wonderful postdocs who came to my lab, chose my lab because of this, perhaps. Mm-hmm. They heard me give a talk, or they read my papers or our papers, and they sort of were attracted by the enthusiasm and the importance of the work we were doing. Yeah, certainly.
So, thank you so much. I think it's actually time for some questions from our audience. Annika, you will help us moderate.
Yes, so I will have two of my colleagues in the audience. So it's Pontus and Olle. Pontus is the educator and teacher at the museum, and Olle is actually the director of the Nobel Museum in Stockholm. So give them a warm hand as well. And so now,
I have a hard time understanding. You might have to.
Yeah.
Okay, Annika.
So you will raise your hands and a short question, okay? And Pontus and Olle will repeat the question also. So talk slowly, please.
Namaskar. My question is, are scientists born or made by teachers like us? What is the best motivation a teacher can give to make best researchers and scientists?
Thank you. Very good question.
So what do you think? I would like to ask the question to you as a teacher. What do you think?
Motivation and knowledge we will give. Besides that, what else we can push upon to see that maximum researchers come out?
I think everybody of you knows that the children vary greatly in their talents and in their interests. And I think for the teacher, it's important to see where there is some potential and really support that. But also, of course, you have to see that, well, not to neglect too many other aspects. I think that some basic knowledge also has to be conveyed to all the students. But if there is someone who is particularly interested and enthusiastic for something, I think you could foster that. And you know that the differences in the students is also in part genetics. It means it comes from themselves, and you cannot do very much. I mean, if someone is not talented for mathematics, your energy is wasted to make a mathematician out of this person. And the same is of course for art. I mean, it's easier to see, for example, when painting or musicians, they are usually talented from birth, and you can support that. And I think what is also important for a teacher is to, if you see that someone is very enthusiastic in a topic where you have the feeling this is too difficult and maybe this is not the right thing to do, you might try to very carefully redirect the interest. Because otherwise this would be unsuccessful and not very happy.
Thank you so much. Excellent question and a wonderful answer. Thank you. So we'll go to the next question.
Good afternoon, Professor Nüsslein-Volhard. My name is Manoj Borkar, and I've been a student of biology for the last 30 years.
30? Okay.
3 decades. I've been learning biology and so trying to teach biology, but I believe I learn more than I teach.
Okay.
In a country like India, where there are developmental aspirations, how do we enthuse the governments and the policymakers to invest significantly in science education and research?
I don't know. As far as I can tell, we are on a good way here. I have visited several Indian universities which are excellent, and they have been teaching excellent students, and we had wonderful people coming to Europe. I had several researchers from India in my lab, so it is possible in India to do excellent science. And perhaps, I'm not a politician, but I think this is a problematic question to me, because I don't know the budget. Of course, we can always say we need more science, but there are other things the country needs as well. So how to distribute this? This is something for the politicians who are here.
So, hard question to answer, but very good answer as well. So, Ulla, you have someone?
Professor Volhard, for someone who teaches biology and a world that's increasingly every day brings in a new discovery that deals with genes and human beings, and CRISPR being one of the latest, and saying gene editing, where do we find a balance in an increasingly materialistic world to strike a balance between research in the biological sciences and ethics?
Good question. I personally think there is much less possibility to interfere with the genetic content of human beings than people think in general. I think it's very risky, and it will not be done in our lifetimes. And it's too much hype in the newspapers about these things. And some of these experiments are done just because they are spectacular or so, but they're not really interesting, basically interesting. I mean, I think it's important I think what is important is if women cannot have children, or there is an inherited disease in the family, to help them to have healthy children. I think this is perfectly okay and legitimate, but more than that I wouldn't go. And there had been large discussions, long discussions, enormous amounts of paperwork published about cloning humans, and it all came to nothing. You know, this is something which is out of reach, and people don't know it. And if they think in theory it can be done, it also will be done in practice. I think this is wrong. You cannot do with humans what you can do with fishes. You cannot, because a human embryo is very, very precious, and there are not very many. I mean, it's very small numbers a woman can have. So it's out of question. We have, in the case of fishes, when we do genetically modified fishes, we have thousands of eggs where we can try. In most cases it fails. And in most cases it fails in animals. So it will also fail in most cases in humans. And with humans you don't do experiments. You cannot really do experiments with humans. And we have to keep that in mind. We do not transfer our knowledge from fishes and frogs and mice directly to humans. This is a completely different issue.
Thank you for making that very clear to us. It was very interesting to listen to you, and we will see you again. So thank you so much for this session. So when I was a teacher, I was teaching literature and music, and of course the literature prize, the Nobel Prize in Literature. I was really curious every year who would get it. Was it some author that I had read, or was it someone that I never heard of? And I always wanted to teach my students about this author, preferably the next day. But it was very hard, and this was a very long time ago, so we didn't have the internet. So I did a not so good lesson about the literature prize. So now when I started working with this, I wanted to help teachers to do a really good lesson about the new prizes. So, and I welcome up on stage my colleague Pontus from the Nobel Museum, and he will walk you through this material that we have put online for you to use. Okay, give him a warm hand.
So, I'm very, very pleased and honored to be here. As I said, or as Annika said, I'm working as a teacher 1 day a week only, and then 4 days a week I work at the Nobel Museum. But basically the work is the same. We try to help the teachers and we try to help the students to their development. And what we often ask the teachers is, how can we help you? And one of the questions that we always get is, how can we get good resources to the latest Nobel Prizes? And that is why, as Annika said, we from 2017 started the Nobel Prize lessons. And that's a resource not only for the teachers in Sweden and Stockholm, also a resource for all of the teachers all over the world, because it's on the internet. So it's on a web page. And it's also well-established sources with direction to further reading from the prize-awarding institutions. So, let me just walk you through this. And it will just be a very short presentation. I won't get too much into the real material, because you have to take a closer look yourself, I guess. But I will show you the content. Yes. So, the content is lesson material to download, and okay, sorry. How we did this material was that we're, of course, attending the press conference at the prize awarding institutions, and then we get help from experts from the prize awarding institutions that we talk to, and of course it's a pressing schedule, because we want to have the material out 24 hours after the announcement. So it's kind of hard work, but it's really fun as well. And to our help, we have some copywriters and translators, so we do it in Swedish and we also do it in English. So the content of this is a teacher's guide with a timetable to the lessons. And we have a slideshow and a speaker's manuscript. Also a text for pupils with questions, and the questions are made to develop further discussions in class. So you could do this in just one lesson, or you can develop the content more and have further discussions as well. And then there's a short film with some professor at the prize awarding institution that explains the prize again. So this is very resourceful material, I think. So I will just give you a very short example from the economics prize lesson. And I should say this, there's all the 6 categories are made lessons, and we also have one lesson that contains all the 6 prizes or categories. So, the economic prize, of course, it's not in the will, even though Alfred Nobel was one of the greatest industrialists in his time, and he was also a very well-known inventor. The economics it was not in his will, and it was not the real Nobel Prize. It is not the real Nobel Prize, but it's a memory prize. And this prize came to be in 1968, because the Swedish central bank had their 300 years anniversary. It's actually the oldest central bank in the world. They beat Bank of England with 1 year, so they wanted to highlight that. And then they asked the Nobel Foundation to have a Nobel Prize in Economics, but the foundation said no, it's not in its will, so they made a memory prize instead. So the economics prize was handed out the first time in, or awarded the first time in 1969. So 2017's laureate is Richard H. Thaler, as you can see, and he got the prize for his contributions to behavioral economics. One area of economics focuses on understanding how people think when they make economic decisions. Thaler's work and research have helped us to understand the role of psychology in economics. And Thaler is, actually, he was interested in how people make economic decisions when he started doing his research in the 70s. And he thought that it's really strange that the basis of classical economic science is that people make rational decisions when they make economic decisions. And for most part, people don't do that. So he thought that was kind of strange. So he started doing research about this. And this is why he gets the prize, you can say. For what affects people's decisions? Well, it's a lot of different things, but most of the time, they're not rational. And he had given 3 examples on this in his research. So the first one is mental accounting. That's a term that he uses a lot and that he started using in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. And mental accounting is, for instance, I love Goa. I think I had a very wonderful time here. So I think I'm going to go back on vacation. But it's really expensive to fly from Sweden to Goa. So I will start to save. So I may think about, I'll put away 2,000 Swedish crowns every month from my pay, okay? And I dream about this vacation. It's going to be nice. So what I do, one day I walk down the street and I see a sale on some shoes that I really like, okay? So I want to buy the shoes, but in my mental accounting, I have put away the money to the vacation in Goa. So I'm standing there, I don't know what to do. And what I do then is I put out my credit card. And I say, oh, I got a credit card. So I buy the shoes. And then I still can go to Goa on vacation. But that's not rational. Because when I pay with a credit card, it costs me more than if I just took the money that I actually have. But my mental accounting is doing that. It's making me just don't take the money, use the credit card instead. And that's not in accordance with classical economic theory, for instance. But I will get back to that example as well. So, the second example is that people is interested in reasonable and fair when they make economic decisions. For instance, another example, if it rains, start raining really much, I don't have my umbrella with me. I want to go to a shop for umbrellas. So I go there, and while I'm walking in the store, I see that the person who sells the umbrellas, he raises his prices because he knows that demand is going to increase, right? Then I get really angry because that's not fair, I think. And I go out in the rain without my umbrella. That's also a decision that's not really rational. So, the third thing that Thaler has brought forward is the lack of self-control. Because people are short-term planning and long-term planning. And if I go back to my example with Goa and my shoes, the short-term goal for me would be to have the shoes. And I buy them and I get satisfied short-term. But if I put those 2 goals before me, the shoes and the vacation to Goa, I see that it's more fun and better for me if I go to Goa. So, mental accounting helps us also, because I think a second time when I don't have the money, I think, because I have done mental accounting, and then I don't buy the shoes. So, mental accounting can also help us with the lack of self-control. So, what are the benefits of Thaler's research? Of course, he says that of the social sciences, national economy is one of the one that has most importance for planning and for policy making. And if the national economy or the theories that lies beneath the policy making is wrong, then we have bad policy making. So these are important things for our society. We'll skip this, but this is just one example, and I would like you to try this, and you can try it with a colleague from Sweden. We can help you match. So if you are interested in this, then you go to our website and you just sign your name, and we will help you with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pontus. So, I told you that we are just forming this Nobel Education Network, and now I want you to talk to each other for a small time, and what digital resources could be useful. Now Pontus has shown you the Nobel Prize lessons. That's one of the resources we do, but we also want to connect teachers in different countries to each other. So turn to somebody that you don't know and talk for a while about this, okay? Go on, talk to each other. Good. I hear that you started talking very much to each other. So, I hope we can continue this discussion. That's why I want you to join our Nobel Education Network, because we are doing this together. We want to provide the things that you find useful and to inspire you to go deeper into the teaching profession and deeper into your own knowledge and be inspired to teach at the very best level. So, and also, you can go and write this on our website, the formula that I made for you, so you can also hand it in digitally. Okay, thank you very much. Now it's time to introduce the interview with the Nobel laureate, Serge Haroche. Give him a warm hand. Welcome up on stage.
So, no, I think it's on. Yes, we are here to talk about schools. And I also am curious, like I was with Professor Nüsslein-Volhard, about your time as a student. Were you a good student in school? Or were you also just interested in some things?
No, I must say I was a good student.
Okay.
I was interested in a lot of topics, not only in science. I was interested in history, literature, and I was lucky to have some very good teachers. I remember a teacher, history teacher, and it was that year, I think it was in high school, we had, the program was to teach about French history, 18th century French history, and he spent the whole year talking to us about the French Revolution. And he was teaching in such a way that one day of teaching, one lesson was about one day of the French Revolution. So we went through it almost in real time. And he was very enthusiastic. He had some political views that you might not agree with, but he had a passion for that period. And he was able to really give us his passion and make us feel that history was important, that things which happened at that time had repercussions up to the present day, and this was a fantastic experience. Although I did not, I must say later on, I did not agree with his political opinions, but I must say he was a very good teacher. And it was the same, I had also a good teacher in mathematics at the end of high school. The teacher was very rigorous, who explained to us that a proof in mathematics had to be free of any leaks, of any possible mistakes, and he really gave us, explained to us the importance of a good proof, which is true for mathematics, but which is also true for other parts of science, and I remember that, and this was in high school. After that I had also a very good teacher in universities, and we can talk about that too.
Yeah, sure. Because it seems like both those teachers you mentioned, that you said that the idea of a good proof is valuable not only in mathematics but in other places. And the history teacher who, I mean, probably very useful, but maybe a bit limited to just learn 1 year of the French Revolution, but still conveyed his enthusiasm for history, which maybe, is that the case? Maybe that's more important to have the enthusiasm for the subject than just facts.
Yeah, yes, I think it's important to have a teacher who can open your imagination and your mind to new things and really excite your curiosity. And I was lucky to have, in some courses, very good teachers. Of course, I had other teachers who were not that good, but I forgot about them.
Okay. But I must ask, because you had one teacher in physics who received the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, that was later on when I went enter in at the university level at a school called École Normale Supérieure in Paris, which is an institution of higher education. I was very lucky because I had very good teachers there. The teacher who became my thesis advisor, Claude Cohen-Tanuji, got a Nobel Prize later on, but he himself was the student of Alfred Kastler, was a previous generation, and who also got a Nobel Prize. So it tells you that it's very important to be in the right environment. And from the beginning of my university studies, I was lucky enough to be in an institution which cherished freedom of thought, gave opportunities to young minds to develop, and I am very grateful for that. It's very important to be raised and to be trained in such an atmosphere, clearly.
Yeah, there's about the teacher getting a Nobel Prize. There's actually some statistics that say that one thing that Nobel laureates have in common is that they often have Nobel laureates as professors and tutors, but the trick seems to be to become a student of that Nobel laureate before the laureate gets the prize. Afterwards it's easier, but before it, so picking the right teacher seems to be a skill.
Yeah, it's also a matter of luck. It happened that I entered into this institution at that time. I was also lucky because I started at a time when the laser was being invented. It was a fantastic instrument which has led to a lot of development, not only in basic science but also in applied sciences. And at that time when I started, it was clear that the laser was going to make a big change in basic research. We did not know what it would bring us to, but the fact that the laser was such a promising device made me sure that I was in the right environment to do my research, and it happened to be true.
Yeah, so the field is important too. So, but of course, you went to university and became a researcher, and I talked about that before, but this divide between teaching and research, what's your take on that?
Okay, I have always been teaching. When I started teaching, I started at the undergraduate level, and I had to teach very general courses. I remember my first course was for PreMed students. And this is very difficult because these PreMed students are not interested in physics or in mathematics, but at least in France, and I think it's the same in many other countries in the world, maths and physics are used to screen them and to choose which students will be able to go on. So they hate this topic on which they will be selected. And so it's very hard to teach to them and to get them interested in the topic. So I had to find a lot of examples from biology, try to explain, for example, why the giraffe can live with the head so high above ground, and it has to do with the pressure of the blood, and why if the giraffe is just lowering her head to drink water, and if it does it too quickly, it just faints because it just faints when it goes back up because the blood is not coming back to the brain. That you can compute all this if you do a lot of physics. So it was really a challenge. But after that, I went to teach to students who are more interested in physics at the graduate level. And at the last stage of my career, starting in 2001, I was appointed a professor at Collège de France. And Collège de France is a very special institution in which the professors their duty is to teach some topic which belongs to their research, to their own research area. So you have to teach research as it is going on at the time you are delivering your lectures. So it is very challenging because you have to try to explain in simple terms what you are doing, but at the same time it's very useful because when you have to explain something in simple terms, it means that you have to understand it much at a very deep level, really to understand what you are doing and what colleagues of yours are doing in the same field. And this gives you ideas for your research. If you can explain something in simple terms, it gives you ideas about new experiments you can do, new demonstration of the basic effects that you are trying to find out. And I have always found that being a teacher at this level and doing research are two sides of the same coin. It's very difficult to separate them. I know that other colleagues of mine, in particular Claude Cohen-Canucci, who is a fantastic teacher, have always said also that his teaching has helped him in his research in a very important way.
So there's no teaching research divide. It's actually complementary. You would say that.
In my case, I think it's true, and I think the fact that you don't understand something very deeply if you are not able to explain it in simple terms is something true too.
What do you think a teacher can make? What kind of mistakes can teachers make with students, do you think?
A lot.
What are the worst? You said you had some bad teachers, but you forgot about them. But do you remember why they were bad?
Of course, they are bad if they are boring, and they are boring if they are not really interested in what they are teaching. Okay. I think the problem, for instance, in France, we have the students for instance, in mathematics, the students, even in elementary school, do not appear well in the international classification of students. They get a low ranking. They are not good at fractions, adding numbers and things like that. And I think one of the reasons is that most teachers in elementary school have been trained in humanities, in literature, and don't have a good training in simple mathematics. And I think it's difficult to teach something if you don't know the matter that you are teaching much above the level that you are going to teach. I give you an example. I was always fascinated by numbers. From elementary school, I like to count everything and to look at the properties of some numbers. The squares, for example, are very interesting. And you can teach that in a very imaginative way to students. I met 1.5 years ago a famous Indian mathematician Manjul Bagdava, who got a field medal in mathematics, and he used to give fantastic lectures to young pupils from elementary school. For example, you have very interesting properties which is very simple to explain. In number theory, things are very simple to state, and sometimes they are very difficult to prove. For example, the Fermat theorem, which says that if you add two numbers, the cubes or the fourth power of two numbers, you cannot never get another cube or another fourth number. It took more than 300 years before this was proved. But you have other results which are very simple. One of them is the following. If you add odd numbers, an odd number is a number which cannot be divided by 2. If you add odd numbers, you get the succession of squares. 1 is the square of 1. If you add 3, you get 4, which is the square of 2. If you add 5, you get 9, which is the square of 3, and so on. It's very simple, and every student, pupil can understand that, just compute. But then to prove it, and to prove it can be difficult or simple, and Manjul was able to prove it with simple geometrical drawings on a blackboard. And it was fascinating to see how the children understood that as a game. It was very deep mathematics, simple mathematics, very deep, but at the same time a game. But for a teacher to be able to do that, the teacher must have had, of course, much more knowledge than what he is teaching, and enthusiasm, and try to show to the student that this is beautiful, that this is something which can excite their imagination for going further.
So it seems like there are a couple of things that are important. It's deep knowledge, as a teacher, deep knowledge, enthusiasm, but also, I guess, creativity and being able to make things interesting.
Yes. For example, the teacher is teaching elementary physics or chemistry. He must or she must try to design simple experiments, simple demonstrations, which shows the pupils that you can understand things by doing simple manipulation in the lab or just in a classroom. And that also means that the teacher you need teachers who have this enthusiasm, who really want to do that. And so I think that before the training of students, you need a good training for the teachers. And the teachers need the teachers who are trained need to be recognized and considered by society. And this is, I think, it's one of the problems. I remember my teachers when I was young were teachers who had been trained themselves in France. There are schools called École Normale, which are schools in which you get a normal training, a standard training for teachers. This has been installed by the French Republic at the end of the 19th century, when the politicians wanted to make a system of education for the whole nation and to propagate through education the values of democracy and the values of science. And the teachers at that time were called the soldiers of the Republic in French. That is, they were propagating the values of democracy, freedom, and science and knowledge through society. And at that time, the teachers were well recognized. In small villages of France, the teacher was supposed to be one of the most important guys. And it's no longer the case now. Teachers now are less recognized in society. They are less well paid corresponding compared to other professions. And I think this is a problem in France and a problem everywhere in the world. The minds of young people are certainly the most wealthy, the most promising things you might have in a country. That's the real waste of the country. And to train these minds, you need to have responsible people, good people, and for that, of course, you have to give to these people the best possible conditions for them to be able to work and to be recognized as important for the society at large.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yesterday, I was at the round table. We were talking about investment in science, and you mentioned that no one else did, but you mentioned that one of the most important investments for science is, of course, to invest in teachers. And speaking of teachers, I think it's time for some questions from our audience.
Professor Haroche, that was very interesting. So, I will send out my colleagues in the audience now. So, now it's your turn to talk to the Nobel laureate, Professor Haroche. So, please. And very short questions, please. Okay, and speak slowly.
Good afternoon. My name is Ashish. I have a question in two folds. The first part of my question is, can education and innovation work hand in hand today? And the second part of my question is our education system right now just trying to feed our economies and swaying students away from actual root innovation values?
I think you can choose which questions you want to answer. Very big questions.
Can education and innovation work hand in hand? I think the two are, of course, very closely related. Education is important to train all the children in a given society to acquire knowledge and to understand the values of science, but not only that, the values of civilization, the values of knowledge. And it is from these students, from all these people who have been trained in this way, who have understood these values, that innovation will come, because you will have scientists, you will have engineers who will be able to do the innovative work. But the problem is that education is a long-term activity. What you do now to improve the education of people will give results in one generation from now, which is 20 or 30 years. And innovation, the invention of new products, new marketable products, is something which the governments and private companies want to get very fast. So there is a tendency to try to push innovation because it will give short-term results and produce financial outcomes in a short term, and not to put all the money which is required in education, because education is a long-term project which will give results much later. And I think it's a mistake, because you cannot get innovation if you don't have good science, and you cannot have good science if you don't have good education to start with. So education and innovation are linked, but one comes before the other, and this has to be taken into account, I think, in the way countries like India, but other countries too, are being ruled and governed.
Oh, thank you for that answer. So we have to be patient also. It's a long-term thing. Okay, thank you. So next question. Ulla, do you have someone?
So I wanted to know about your physics teacher in school, because you didn't mention about it. You mentioned about the history and the mathematics and the bio teacher. Because I'm very curious to know that at what point of time did your interest in physics deepen?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I don't remember of any teacher who has really made a big impression on me in high school. On the other hand, I had very good teacher in mathematics, and when I started, I was more inclined toward mathematics than towards physics. And then, at the end of the 1950s, it was a great time for technology, the development in technology. In particular, it was a time when the Russians sent the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, in 1958. And then the race to the moon between the United States and Russia started. And at that time I was really fascinated by this development, and I was also very much struck by the fact that with the math that I was learning at school, I was able to make very simple calculations about the orbits of the satellites and Kepler's law, and relating physical facts to mathematics. And then I started to think that I wanted to go deeper into that and to try to understand why the physical world was ruled by mathematics. And And this happened in high school. Then when I came to university, I learned that an atom was a planetary system with electrons going around the nucleus. So again, it was a system which naively you could describe by trying to use Newton's law. And then I learned that it was not right, that there was something else, quantum mechanics, which explained what happened at the macroscopic scale. And at that time, in university, I had charismatic teachers, which we mentioned already. Teachers who were really able to convey the ideas of quantum physics in rather simple terms. I talked about current energy. Older than current energy, Alfred Kastler was also a fantastic teacher. He did not know really quantum mechanics as well as current energy, because when he was young himself, quantum mechanics was not invented yet. So he had to learn quantum physics as an adult. And so he did not grasp really all the details, but he had a very fertile mind, and he was able to talk to us about atoms in a rather poetic way. He talked about atoms as if he was seeing them, and it was really fascinating and fantastic to have at the same time the rigorous teaching of Claude Cohen-Tanuji and this kind of poetic and enthusiastic teaching of Kastler. And the mix of these two teaching made me believe very early on that I wanted to do this kind of physics, to go into quantum physics and more precisely atomic physics and the study of interaction of atom with light. And that's how it started. But from the beginning, I was more interested in mathematics than in physics.
Thank you. So the advice would be then maybe to combine things and to explain in a poetic way also.
The advice is to be lucky, to be exposed to good teachers who really are able to encircle in you this passion for a given field. In my case, it was quantum physics, but I have colleagues and fellow students who went in other areas and have had also very positive experiences.
That's fantastic, and you all have the opportunity to do this with your students and really to make them passionate about the things that you teach. So give a warm hand to Professor Haroche. Thank you so much. And now, sorry, I didn't have any more time for questions. Sorry. No. So now it's time to bring up some teachers on stage, and we will have the guest moderator Sanjeev Aliwadi. Please come up on stage. Give him a warm hand.
Good afternoon. My name is Sanjeev Aliwadi. I'm from Delhi, unfortunately, and I'm here to moderate this discussion in the panel. So, teaching, I'm told, is one of the 5 most stressful professions in the entire world. And so each one of us here, I've been a teacher too, are in a very, very stressful occupation. And if there are 1,000 people, and I'm told that there are 1,000 teachers in this place right now, and if each of you teachers were to actually influence or in some way impact or teach directly or indirectly 50 students a year, then you would be influencing 50,000 students in 1 year. And if you were to go further and look at 10 years from now, you would have gone from 50,000 to 500,000 students. So 5 lakh students is the impact that you have. Now social research, and I'm a social researcher too, tells us that each student or each person has a direct or indirect influence on 250 people. So in other words, 1,000 teachers who are gathered here will not only impact 5 lakh students in 10 years, but you will impact directly or indirectly 125 million people all over India. Okay. Now, is that something you're going to be proud about? So what I want you to do is stand up for a second, because I feel like you all are sitting down for too long. Please stand up. and congratulate each other. Please shake each other's hand and say, well done. Thank you, you can sit down. The problem with teachers, because of the system that we know that exists all over the world, especially also in India, we feel like we've done a bad job at the end of it all. We feel guilty, we feel, oh my goodness, I could have done better. I've been looking at the system and running after this and running after that. But at the end of the day, please celebrate with me the fact that you are in an amazing profession. And there are students who will come back to you as they have to me and say, thank you so much for being my teacher. That's happened to you, hasn't it? Yes, and I'm sure it will keep on happening to you. So thank you for being here and thank you for listening to us. So here we have, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce yourself, and you are, sir. What's your name?
I'm Sadananda Mejad from Edyavar School, Kujira, Pamboli.
Siddharthi Netralkar, Principal of People's High Secondary School, Panjim.
I'm Pontus Tunblad and I'm a high school teacher in Stockholm.
I'm Siddharaj Mopkar and I work with a couple of schools in Panjim.
And I'm Annika Hedosfalk, Head of Education at Nobel.
Welcome them, please. We already met 2 of them and now there are 3 more. And so my first question comes to you, sir, Sadanand, and that is that, and it's a question for all of you, so please, rapidly, what do you celebrate most about the teaching profession that you have taken an interest in and have made your vocation for the rest of your life?
I think in the life of a teacher, observing their pupils to attain the highest level of the success will be the most highly enjoyable event to celebrate. That too, students achieving this level with full social responsibilities that will lead to the welfare of our country or his motherland.
Excellent. Madam?
Yeah, every day is a celebration for the teacher because a smile on the child's face is mere celebration. But if you ask me, real celebration comes when a child comes back to your alma mater as a successful global citizen. And not only that, as a gentleman or a gentlewoman, because that is what he has chosen to be, because he has not forgotten his values. And that is the most part of the celebration.
Wow, isn't that amazing? Sir?
Well, I think that the way that I get to know my students and to feel that I have some impact in their development that's the most celebrating thing for me.
Very good.
Yeah, so I have 2 things. First of all, it's curiosity. Unfortunately, as pupils grow up, if you talk to a 9th standard kid, the curiosity goes down as you climb up the ladder. And there comes a point where something as innate as curiosity needs to be celebrated so that you can bring curiosity back in their lives.
Fantastic. Very good. Thank you. And Annika?
Yeah, I really miss working with students because I loved working with the students every day, both as a teacher and as a principal. And for me, I think the strongest feeling was, because Sweden is a very safe country, so people are running from wars and things to us. So I have taught many refugees. So many refugees and immigrants from all over the world. And to see them be so happy about getting an education that many people in Sweden take for granted. And we should not do that. And we should always make education accessible for all. Not only for boys and girls, but also with all different backgrounds. So that's what makes me really happy, to see the light in their eyes.
Amazing, amazing. I work with street kids, and I remember one of the street kids coming back and saying this to us, that when I came in, I couldn't dream. And as a kid grew up in our school, later on one day, and we listened with tears in our eyes, the child said, that I have learned to dream. And isn't it amazing if education can teach people to dream? So I'm going to ask one of the audience, maybe you sitting there, sir. Could you answer that question too? What do you celebrate about teaching? Just very quick.
So for me, a celebration of teaching really is to see the curiosity and finding out the meaning of life and living happily and satisfied. That's where the celebration comes.
Very good. So can we ask the next question now? And the next question is, what is your greatest challenge in terms of teaching? So
when it comes to teaching, because my subject is maths, you all know that students always have a fear of maths. So greatest challenge here is to overcome this fear of mathematics. And to overcome this, we conduct many activities. Normally all do it, but we try out to find out the exact cause, and we visit parents. We have a good relation with the parents and the students, so that we can understand what difficulty the student is facing, study environment at home, and based on that, we work out for the students. Some special classes are conducted for all three groups of students, above average, average student, below average, and to some extent it gives a very good solution.
Okay, thank you. Siddharthi, you're a head teacher. What are your challenges as a head teacher?
As a head, to make that triangle very stronger, and when the three sides of the triangle, the parents, the teachers, and the students, the bond between three of them should be very strong, and then only we can get good citizens. So that is my real challenge, to see that all the three sides are perfect.
Very good. Yeah. I find, you know, at least one of the subjects that I was a science student. For me, history was something which I just couldn't take into any account. Alauddin Khilji, and then I would have you know, somebody else, and then somebody else. I forget half the names that I've got. And then they lived in this dynasty, and they lived in this century, and they lived in this year. And to go back to the examinations and keep on talking about that was really boring for me. So do you find teaching history a challenge, and how do you overcome it?
Yeah, of course I do, because I work at a school that's mostly pupils interested in science, so that's hard for me. That's actually the worst part, but to get through to each individual. But I work a lot with feedback, and when you think about feedback, you think that it's good for the students to get feedback from me, but I work with feedback the other way, so it makes me know where the students are at all times. So that's the way I
very good. And what about you? You know, you teach physics and chemistry. Now, I know all about HNO3 and H2SO4 and what happens when you make Regia. Okay, I got that right. And then U square, what was it? S equals UT plus half AT square. Or V square minus U square equals 2AS. Now these are all formulas that are stuck in my brain. And at the age of 57, having left school at the age of, 16 or something, I still remember these formulas. They're just stuck in my brain. What do I do with these formulas? How do students see them as practical?
Now let us look at your problem itself, you know. You know the formulas by heart because you had to answer an exam at the end of everything that you learned, and what you ended up learning were those formulas that have stuck with you. But instead, if we move from that closed answer-based approach to a more open-ended problem-solving model, this I think is the biggest challenge of today's education system as a whole. Because as the world is moving towards more and more innovation, and the knowledge is so easily accessible, we need not really test memory. We should go beyond memory and try to look at each child as a problem solver, because I think the children are the ones who come up with the most innovative solutions, more than the teachers themselves today.
Very good. Very
so I think that's the biggest challenge.
Where was he when I was growing up? And Anika, you've been a head teacher. What are your challenges as a head teacher? What have been your challenges?
Yeah, I think to train the teachers and not only educate the kids for a world that was before, but also to educate them for the future and the skills and knowledge that they need to have to move into the future. And we know so little about the future, so we also have to teach them how to be constant learners and also how the teachers can keep on learning and go deeper into both the knowledge and the skills of a teacher. So I think it's quite a challenge for teachers to get the time to really be better. So I would like to help out with this. So if I can make a small contribution on this, then I will be happy.
Very good. Okay, and I'm going to ask a member of the audience, and let's see, it should be a lady this time. Would you like to contribute to that, since you're just very close by and you can pick up the mic from me? What have been your challenges, and please do tell us which subject you teach.
It's general science, and challenge I would say to make really people understand. For a person who is in the field of science, so many things are already kind of in the brain. So it's very hard to really tell them to people who are not so exposed in terms of knowledge and all that. And simplifying is the basic challenge, I would say.
Okay, so I'm just going to invite the panelists to say one last comment very quickly, because we have exactly a minute left. So you have 1/6 of a minute, 1/5 of a minute here. One last comment.
Okay, as I will be talking about my subject only, as a math subject, as I told, students have a fear. Second thing is that to develop interest in the students about this subject, or to create interest among the students, it is essential to do many activities. We in our school give some tasks to students, wherein they prepare some models, some mathematics games, puzzles, and they learn by themselves wherever it is possible. It may not be possible for all topics, but some topics can be covered, and the students enjoy it, they understand it by these activities. And I want also all my colleagues, new youngsters also, to have some such creative methods wherein students will develop a love for math, so that no one will have any fear left in the subject.
Okay, cos square theta plus sin square theta equals 1. And Madam, very quickly, because we have almost finished our time.
Teachers, today's child can get all the knowledge from the internet. Now, the role of we as teachers should be to have a good rapport with the students, so much that they don't come only with the problems of the subject, but they seek your guidance in their personal problems, and they become your friends. Yeah,
and since we don't have much time, I'm just going to ask for one last comment from Pontus here, and that is not, the question is this: what message would you leave for teachers in India, having been here this time?
Well, I was with Annika on the school the other day, and I met you and looked to that. It was amazing, and I thought that the most interesting thing was that we had so many things in common, both the good parts and the bad parts. And I feel that if we can get together and work more together, bridging the gap between our countries and other countries around the world, if we can make that a possibility, that will be very, very useful, I think.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for giving us your time, and give them another round of applause, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sanjeev. That was really amazing. Okay, you can put it here. So, now it's time for a Nobel laureate, again, to share some thoughts with us. So give a warm welcome to Professor Roberts. And Gustav will guide you through this interview as well.
So, Professor Roberts, I will start by asking you the same thing as I've asked the two previous Nobel laureates about your own time in school. Can you tell us, how was school for you? Were you interested in every subject? Or was it only a few?
Definitely not every subject. I was lucky when the very first school I went to, in England they have something called an infant school that you typically go to when you're 4 or 5. And I was lucky that I could already read because I'd learned to read at home. And so I skipped a year, which was good, and then went to junior school. And I would say it was in junior school that I had probably the most enlightening experience that I ever had in school. And that was because the headmaster must have seen something in me, and he used to slip me puzzles when I was leaving school to go home. He'd give me little mathematical puzzles or little word puzzles or just something to do, and I got hooked on mathematics. I absolutely loved mathematics, and I don't know why, but I give it to him. I think he was the guy who really got me hooked on math. And then later on I went to grammar school, and the math there was quite interesting. Physics I hated. We had an absolutely awful physics teacher.
It's a bad day for physics teachers.
It's a bad day, yes. Well, maybe there's a problem with the way they teach physics. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about my physics experience was when I went to university, I took chemistry as my main course, but we had to do physics and math as secondary subjects, and I discovered at university that physics was really mathematics, and then it was easy. But at school, it was not taught as mathematics. It was taught in some strange way that really turned me off.
I don't want to... Well, I think that there actually may be some students that think that physics without mathematics can be a good way to teach this as well. So I'm not... Well... but this idea of this teacher who gave you these puzzles, I heard that I heard or read an interview with you where you said that this got you interested in problem solving, that you actually dreamt of becoming a detective first.
Yeah, I think that's right. So this early fascination with puzzles is something I have to this day. So games, puzzles, I just love them. I think these are really good for kids. Even video games, I think, are not the shoot-'em-up variety, but the ones that involve problem solving, I think, are really good. And yes, I'm sure, sort of looking at a puzzle and being a detective were one and the same thing. And so, yes, I read a book. It said How I Became a Detective. It sounded fantastic. And this was a typical detective. And I thought, well, this would be great. You know, I could do this. It's just like solving puzzles all day. And lo and behold, here I am. This is what I do. I solve puzzles all day by doing research. They're just a different sort of puzzle.
Yeah, so somehow you did change from detective to scientist. When did that happen?
Well, that happened when my father bought me a chemistry set.
Okay.
And so I think I was 10 or 11, and I got a chemistry set for Christmas. And so I loved it. I thought this was great. I quickly did all the experiments in the book.
And then you didn't do anything more, right?
Well, I did. I went down to the library and started to read books about chemistry. And I discovered I had all the ingredients I needed to make gunpowder. And so from then on, it was fireworks and explosives, and I had a great time. I thought this was wonderful.
Yeah, and I mean, your parents, were they supportive of this, or were they afraid that you would blow the house up?
My parents didn't really know what I was doing, which is something I always recommend to kids. Don't tell your parents too much about what you do. But I was also fortunate that my parents, I came from a relatively poor family. My parents both left school at 14, so they didn't have much education. They had no idea what chemistry was all about. But they saw that it was something that I loved doing, and so they were very supportive. My father in particular used to go down to the local pharmacist and buy chemicals for me, you know, and he got anything I asked for he got. He never questioned why I wanted it or anything. So I had a great chemistry set at home.
Yeah, it seems, I've spoken to a few Nobel laureates in chemistry, and they usually share the same experience of getting a chemistry set and then going beyond the limits. And I guess, I mean, it's obviously quite fun, but I guess that's maybe what being a scientist is about, is going beyond the rule book, in a sense.
Well, I'm not sure necessarily I would follow all the way through with that, but I think one of the things I think we do badly at the moment is that a lot of things that kids can do that are fun and are sort of a little on the risky side, and we've decided they shouldn't be allowed to do. And so, for instance, making fireworks at home in the US is almost impossible now. They've regulated it such you can't buy the chemicals you need. Many times kids go to school and they are doing experiments in the lab at school, and they're doing all of these boring experiments that some teacher thought would show them about chemistry, and they don't have the freedom to do the experiments that they would like to do just to see what happens.
So, yes, it seems like freedom might be a good thing for teaching future scientists as well.
Well, I think if you want to be creative, you have to have the freedom to be creative. You have to do things that maybe some adult told you shouldn't do. Maybe some teacher said, oh, no, you shouldn't do that. I always used to think those were the fun things to do. As soon as someone tells me not to do something, I immediately want to do it. And if someone tells me, oh, go and do this, I figure that must be really boring if they want me to do it. They must know what's going to happen at the end of it.
Did you at some point in your career or in your education find a teacher that sort of saw through this and realized that if I just ask him not to do it, he'll do it?
I don't think I did, no.
That might be a good way to approach some students. But you've had some teachers. Have you had any really particularly good teachers or mentors that you remember?
It's funny, throughout the time at school, apart from this headmaster at my first school who got me interested in math and puzzles, I would say there were a few teachers that were kind of okay. I got on quite well with the Latin teacher, and I liked Latin very much, and so that was good. Chemistry teacher was terrible, but I already knew all the chemistry because I'd done it at home and I'd been reading books, and I was way ahead of anything I was ever being taught at school. The person who probably had the biggest single effect was when I was doing my PhD, and I was in a lab with a postdoc from Japan who taught me more chemistry than anybody I've ever come across. He was fantastic. He was one of these people who would suggest you do something, but he would tell you why you were doing it, and by the time you'd finished, not only did you get a good result, but you knew why you got that good result. And I learned huge amounts of chemistry from him. He also taught me to play Go, which was a game that I still enjoy very much. And shogi, Japanese chess, he taught me that too. And in fact, he and I used to play Go by mail after he left for quite a long time. Now, for those of you who know the game of Go, this is a very slow way to play Go. But then after a while, he stopped because his English was getting so bad, I think writing the letter to accompany the move was too much for him. And it's interesting, this was many, many years ago that I saw him. I was in Japan last year for a meeting, and I'd suddenly heard his name mentioned in connection with something, and I arranged to get together, and I met him after some 50-odd years. And he was fantastic. He was such a great guy, really a good guy. But I would say he's probably the best mentor I've ever had, really.
So, and I think that's really interesting what you said about the importance of understanding why you do things. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think very often when you're in a typical teaching situation, you're sort of taught a series of facts, but you're not always taught what is behind the facts in a way where you really feel you understand the logic that led to whatever conclusion you're behind. And so I think there is a method of teaching that can be very helpful for students, and that is not necessarily the traditional way. I remember when I was at university doing chemistry, we had one teacher who taught inorganic chemistry, and all he wanted you to do was memorize the names and so on, and memorize things, but without any real understanding of what was going on. But the professor who taught organic chemistry really made you understand why things worked the way they did and what was going on. And I think this is really very important. You want to know why things work. For me, I tend to be a very logical person, and so I want to know the logic behind everything I do.
So how do you, to understand why you do what you do, I think I've heard you say sometimes that it's by explaining that you really, sometimes, I mean, teaching and explaining things can really help you to understand your own ideas.
And I think that's very true. I'm actually a great believer in the power of communication, because I think if you can explain something to someone, and then it usually means that you understand it yourself. And if you don't understand it yourself, it becomes very easy to just waffle and talk to people and not give them a clear understanding of what's going on. And I think this idea of communicating to people in relatively simple terms, even quite complicated concepts, is something that most people can do if they really try. I have something I call the grandmother test that I give to all of my students. And the grandmother test says, well, can you go home and explain to your grandmother what you do every day? To a point where she understands it, not only so that she says she understands it, but so she can go and tell all her friends exactly what you do, and they can be very proud of the fact that you're doing all of this stuff. And that turns out to be quite difficult to do, but I think it's something that when you learn how to do it, when students learn how to do it, they can become very good communicators. And of course, one of the things that scientists tend not to do very well is communicate to the community, to communicate to other people. And I think often this leads to scientists not having the cleanest reputation, shall we say, that they might have. I think once you do something and you can explain it to the general public, they have a much finer appreciation, a much better appreciation for what's going on and what science is all about.
So when you have, you talk about your students and I always knew about your mentors, but obviously you're a mentor to younger scientists as well. What's important for you to convey to them?
Well, my approach actually to young scientists tends to be to give them a project that they can really pursue on their own, and that they don't have to come and ask me every day, oh, what should I do? I don't like to have to tell them, you've got to do this today and then this tomorrow and so on. I like people to be self-starters, and then to come and talk to me if they have a problem, or ideally if they've found something really interesting. And so I'm not a very hands-on mentor in that sense, but I've found over the years that by picking people who are self-starters, by picking people who come and work in my lab, who really can do it on their own, for me and for them, this has been a very satisfying experience.
It seems like you are trying to become the teacher that you would have liked to have.
Maybe.
Might be a good approach. So I think it's time for Annika and some questions, right?
Thank you so much for this. It was really interesting. So I have used our website for you to fill in a form. So therefore, this time I'm going to pick some of your questions from that. So this is a question that one of the teachers want to know. So how can science education be made more interesting, do you think?
Well, I think, the essence of almost all science is hands-on experiments, doing experiments, trying things. And so I think one of the problems that I see, certainly in American education, and I suspect here too, is that the students don't have much opportunity to do hands-on experiments. And this doesn't necessarily have to be hands-on stuff in the school, it can be hands-on stuff at home. But I think as soon as you sort of, get your hands into some chemicals or into some electrical devices or whatever you're doing, all of a sudden it becomes much more interesting, and especially when you can devise your own experiments and go off and do things. And I found that most of the students that I talk to who get really interested in science have this desire to do the experiments with their own hands. And I think if we could get more of that flavor into the science curriculum, it would be a very good thing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always a challenge to engage the students in the classrooms. So some of the teachers that I talked to before this conference, they were a little bit worried about the size of the class. So they have up to 44 students or something.
It's too many.
Yeah, it's a little bit too many. But also to make the students be more active. We were talking about going from teaching to learning and create that learning classroom. So another question from you is, how do you stay curious?
I don't know, I was born curious. I think most everybody is born curious, and if it doesn't get knocked out of you at school, I think it stays there.
So let's not knock that out of them, okay? So thank you very much, and you will stay here, and we will also give a warm hand to Professor Roberts. And please welcome up on stage Christiane Nüsslein-Volhard for a concluding remark. So we will soon end this, and also a chair, and Nobel laureate. Yes? She's on her way? Okay, thank you. I also asked you in the form, what is the best thing about being a teacher? And this is some of the answers. Passion for learning first, then teaching. That's very wise. Another one says, a teacher can start a spark in her students to take the world to the next level. That's also good. And the third said, true happiness and satisfaction. So you're doing a fantastic and important job. So, okay, are we having Christiane on stage now? Okay. Okay, so I will leave it to you, Gustav. Maybe you can start.
Yeah, because it's quite. I will start by this is just some concluding remarks. I would just ask both of you the same question eventually. So we asked our teachers online, so you can in the forum. One of the questions was, how can teachers contribute to a better world? It's a big question, but do you have any thoughts on that? How can teachers contribute to a better world?
Well, I mean, I think if teachers do a good job, then they automatically will contribute to a better world. But I also think it's important for teachers to realize that when you teach the children, you're also educating their parents. And I've been running a campaign for some time with Nobel laureates about GMOs, pro-GMOs, in favor of GMOs. And I talked to quite a lot of school kids about this issue of GMOs, and very often they will come from households where the parents are afraid of GMOs. But by the time you explain this to the kids, they usually get it, they're not particularly frightened, and they will go home and explain to their parents why their parents shouldn't be frightened. And so I think this is something that's worth bearing in mind as a teacher, that if you're doing a good job, you impact the parents every bit as much as you impact the kids.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And the same question to you, Professor Nüsslein-Volhard. How can, I mean, I know it's a big question, but we asked this question from the teachers, so it's maybe fair that you also get it. How can teachers contribute to a better world?
Teachers can influence the knowledge of the society very much, because it's not better. Is it? Yeah. Well, this is it.
Yes.
No, I mean to convey knowledge. And they are the ones, via the children, they can also influence, of course, the knowledge of the society and the education. And I think education of societies is something really important. To be prepared to know how things function, to question how things function, and to be prepared, prepared and protected against fake news and propaganda from irrational movements.
Yeah. So quite an important role, both of you would say. I think it's, Annika, would you like to ask a question, or do you think it's...
Yeah, I'm just so grateful that you are here and also show the passion for education and talking about the importance of the teachers. So I would like now everybody who participated here on the stage, please come up and we will say thank you to all. So the teachers from the panel, can you please come up on stage? Oh, fantastic. And you can all stand up, please. Stand here. So I think we have emphasized the importance of teachers, and I also want to thank everybody for making this possible. The Department of Biotechnology, the government of Goa, Nobel international partners like Ericsson, 3M, Scania and Volvo Cars. And also I want to thank the Swedish embassy in Delhi, the Swedish consulate in Mumbai, and of course the Nobel laureate and the teachers, both on stage and in the audience. Thank you so much for participating in this. And keep up your very important job, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you.
On behalf of all the organizers, we deeply thank all the Nobel laureates, team from Nobel Museum, Nobel Media. We also thank all the participants, all the panelists, the professors, lecturers, teachers who attended this session. High tea have been arranged for you all.